In this lesson, I'm going to teach you how to estimate percents. So you're going to be able to quickly identify what 10% of a number, 15% of a number, 20, 30, 40, 25, 55. You're going to be able to do that without using a calculator. And before I actually tell you the process, I want you to try to notice a pattern. So I'm going to tell you a whole bunch of 10% of different numbers, and your goal is to identify what is the pattern that I'm using. So if I have 30, 10% of 30, I'm going to tell you is 3. If I have 42, 10% of 42 is 4.2. If I have 163, 10% of 163 is 16.3. If I have 400, 10% of 400 is 40. If I have 20, 10% of 20 is 2. If I have 10, well, 10% of 10 is 1. If I have 48, 10% of 48 is 4.8. If I have 1,250, 10% of 1,250 is 125. So you should identify the pattern that I used when I quickly, using mental math, calculated 10% of the numbers on the left-hand side. And all you have to do when you calculate 10% of numbers, you move the decimal one spot to the left. That's all I did. So the decimal, remember, is always kind of hiding at the end of a number if you can't see it. And all you do when you do 10%, you move it one spot to the left. So we're going to use that strategy to find other percents, because 10% is super fast. We can find that super fast. So we can use that strategy to find 20%, 5%, 15, 30. We can use it to find a bunch of different ones. Our goal when we estimate is to benchmark it to the 10% and go from there. Okay, so if I wanted to find 20% of 32, well, 10% of 32 is 3.2, moving it one spot to the left. Then 20%, well, 20% is just double 10, so it's 3.2 times 2, or 6.4. So 6.4 is 20% of 32. To find 5% of 34, well, our strategy is always the same. 10% of 34 is 3.4. Then 5% is half of 10%, so half of 3.4 is 1.7. So 5% of 34 is 1.7 without using a calculator. Remember again, my goal is to get the 10% and figure out what to do from there. 15% of 16.00. Well, 10% is 1.600. I guess I don't even need to write those down. I'm just going to go ahead and write 1.6. And then I also need a 5. So 5% is half of 10. Well, 10% is 1.6, so half of it is 0.8. 15% is 10 plus the 5%, which turns into 2.4 is, and maybe you want to write 2.40, 2.400, it's all equivalent. So again, at 15% I found my 10, I needed a 5, and then I added them together. 30% of 4.2. Well, I do the 10%. 10% is 4.2. So 30% is timesing it by 3. So 4.2 times 3 is 12.6. And there's one more that some students struggled on when they were working on their homework, and that's a 25%. So I want you to find 25% of 200. So there's a couple ways you can do this. 25% is really 1/4. So you could divide 200 by 4. That's really probably what I would do. But if we're benchmarking with the percents, we still use the same process. 10% is what? 20. And then I need another 10%, or I need a 20%. Actually, I'm going to do the 5 first so I don't get messed up. 5% is half of 10%, so 5% would be 10. 20% is double the 10, so if 10 is 20, double the 20 is 40. So 25% is adding the 5% and the 20, so 50 is 25% of 200. Again, I didn't even end up using my 10% when I added things up. However, I needed it to calculate my 5%, and I needed it to calculate my 20%. So our goal here, when we estimate with percents, your goal is to benchmark it to the 10% and then figure out what you need to do to get to the desired percent.